Part 4 of our videos on evolution deals with other evolutionary forces. So we talked about natural selection as being a major drive in evolution, but evolutionary change is also driven by random processes. The first one that we'll talk about is genetic drift. Genetic drift is random, non-selective changes in allele frequency due to chance. Genetic drift has a larger effect on smaller populations since each individual is more of the total allele. So here we have an example. We have a population of 20, and underneath it a population of 200, and underneath that a population of 2,000. And you can see in the population of 20, the genetic drift is going to have a greater effect because the population size is smaller. Founder effect is another random drive of evolution. Founder's effect is when you have descendants of a small founding population that have different allele frequencies than the population the founders came from. So here we have an originating population. If we were to take a random sample of that originating population, by chance it could have a different allele frequency than the originating population, leading to a difference in the allele percentages from the founding population. One example is with Amish populations and polydactyly. Polydactyly is when you have extra digits, fingers or toes, and it's one symptom of something called the Ellis-Van Creveld syndrome. Syndrome is commonly found amongst Old Order Amish in Pennsylvania. This is a founder effect. Genetically inherited diseases like the Ellis-Van Creveld are more concentrated amongst the Amish because they marry within their own community, which prevents new genetic variation from entering the population. Children are therefore more likely to inherit 2 copies of this particular recessive gene that lead to this genetic disorder. Bottleneck effect is another example. This is when the survivors of a catastrophic decrease in population may have a different allele frequency than the pre-bottleneck population. An example of a bottleneck can be found with the northern elephant seals. They have reduced genetic variation, probably because of a population bottleneck caused by humans when they were hunted in the 1890s. Hunting reduced their population to as few as 20 by the end of the 19th century. The population has since grown to over 30,000, but their genes still carry the marks of this bottleneck because there's much less genetic variation in the population than you would see in the southern elephant seals that were not so intensely hunted. Another example is modern cheetahs are all very genetically similar due to 2 bottlenecks. Gene flow is the movement of alleles due to immigration and emigration. It's another influence of evolution that is not natural selection. So here in this picture we have a group of bluebirds and a group of redbirds, and you could have the offspring of one of these birds go to a new population, and once it starts to breed with the population, then there's going to be some changes in the allele frequency. And the kind of classic example of that is modern human migration. Sexual selection is another example. This is the persistence of traits that signify fitness and aid in reproduction, even if, and most often this is the case with sexual selection, the traits themselves might not actually mean that that individual is more likely to survive. So you've got the difference in claw size here. You've got peacocks. So peacocks have this huge display, and the bigger and brighter and more beautiful the display, the more likely these individuals are to mate. But anytime in nature when you have organisms that have brighter colors, which is typically something that's selected for sexually, that also makes them more susceptible to predators. So it's an interesting dynamic between the predation and the sexual selection. One thing is that sexual selection can be intersexual or intrasexual. So you have intersexual, that's when females are choosing between mates. But you can also have intrasexual, and that's when members of the same sex within a species will compete to gain access to mates. One other misconception thing, often people will say something like evolution is random, and that's generally a misconception. Evolution is a change in allele frequency in a population that involves random forces like we've just talked about, genetic drift, etc., but also selective pressures like natural selection. So to say that evolution is random is not complete. And that will end